Marcus Dalton stood on his porch, watching his 8-year-old daughter Emma chase fireflies in their backyard in Cedar Falls, Oregon. The evening air was crisp, and the distant sound of the Cascade River could be heard through the pine trees. He'd built this life carefully, methodically, like everything else he did. No complications, no variables he couldn't control. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Daddy, look, I caught one. Emma's voice rang out, pure joy, lighting up her face as she cupped her small hands around a flickering light. Marcus smiled, but his phone buzzed insistently. Another work emergency at the construction firm. Always another crisis that needed his immediate attention. He'd learned long ago that the only person he could rely on was himself, especially after what happened 3 years ago when Emma's mother walked out without a backward glance, leaving only a note about finding herself and not being ready for this kind of responsibility. That night had taught him everything he needed to know about depending on others. Emma was his world now, and he was enough for her. They were enough for each other. The morning started like any other Tuesday. Marcus was already dressed in his work clothes, steel-toed boots, worn jeans, and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. Emma sat at their small kitchen table, methodically eating her cereal while reading the back of the box for the 100th time. "Don't forget, Em, Mrs. Patterson picks you up at 3:30 today," Marcus said, checking his watch. Another late night at the Morrison Bridge project meant he'd miss bedtime again, but the overtime pay was worth it. Everything he did was for Emma's future. Emma nodded without looking up. At 8 years old, she'd already learned to be self-sufficient in ways that sometimes worried Marcus. But he told himself it was good for her. She was learning independence, learning not to rely on anyone else. The construction site was a 40-minute drive from their house, winding through the mountains that surrounded Cedar Falls. Marcus had been project manager on the Morrison Bridge renovation for 6 months now, and they were finally making real progress. The old bridge had been a landmark for over 70 years, but time and weather had taken their toll. The new one would be stronger, more reliable, like everything else in his life. Marcus approached the project with methodical precision. He arrived at 6:30 a.m. sharp, reviewed the plans, checked the weather forecast, and briefed his crew on the day's objectives. No surprises, no chaos. "Morning, boss," called out Jake Morrison, the site foreman. No relation to the bridge's namesake, despite what tourists always assumed. Jake had been working construction for 25 years and could read Marcus like a blueprint. "You see the weather report? Storms coming in faster than they thought. Could be here by tonight." Marcus frowned, looking up at the clear blue sky. How much faster? The National Weather Service updated their forecast an hour ago. What was supposed to hit Thursday night is now looking like late tonight, early tomorrow morning. And it's bigger than they first predicted. The Pacific Northwest was famous for its sudden weather changes, but this season had been particularly unpredictable. The mountain runoff was already higher than normal, and any significant rainfall could cause serious flooding in the lower areas. Marcus pulled out his phone and checked the latest updates. Jake was right. The storm system had intensified and was moving much faster than originally forecast. Cedar Falls sat in a valley, with the Cascade River running right through the middle of town. During heavy rains, the river could rise dramatically. "We'll work until noon, then secure everything and send everyone home," Marcus decided. Better safe than sorry. By 10 a.m., the first clouds were starting to gather over the mountains. The crew worked efficiently, knowing that Pacific Northwest weather could change from pleasant to dangerous in a matter of hours. Marcus coordinated with the local authorities, making sure all equipment was properly secured and that residents in the flood-prone areas had been notified. At exactly noon, he sent his crew home and began his own drive back to Cedar Falls. The clouds were getting darker, and he could feel the pressure change in the air. His truck's radio crackled with weather updates and flood warnings. Emma would be safe at school until 3:30. Then Mrs. Patterson would take her home. Their house was on higher ground, well away from any flood zones. Marcus had chosen the location specifically for its safety and isolation. Everything was under control, but as he drove through the winding mountain roads, he couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The storm was moving faster than anyone had predicted, and the radio reports were becoming more urgent with each update. Cedar Falls Elementary sat on Maple Street, just 6 blocks from the river. It was an old brick building that had served the community for 40 years, solid and dependable like everything else in the small town. Emma loved school, especially her 3rd-grade teacher, Miss Rodriguez, who encouraged her love of reading and always had time to answer her endless questions about everything from dinosaurs to space travel. Mrs. Patterson, their elderly neighbor, had been picking up Emma twice a week for the past year. She was reliable, punctual, and genuinely cared about Emma's well-being. Marcus paid her well for the service, and she never failed to have Emma safely home by 4:00 p.m. As Marcus turned onto Main Street, he noticed something that made him slow down. There was a woman he didn't recognize standing outside Henderson's hardware store, looking up at the darkening sky with obvious concern. She was tall, athletic-looking, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. What caught his attention wasn't her appearance, but the way she was studying the sky and the river with the focused attention of someone who understood weather patterns. She was dressed in hiking gear, sturdy boots, cargo pants, a weatherproof jacket. Not typical attire for a casual visitor to Cedar Falls. There was something about her posture, the way she held herself, that suggested military or emergency services background. Marcus almost stopped to ask if she needed directions, but caught himself. He had enough complications in his life without taking on other people's problems. Besides, she looked perfectly capable of taking care of herself. Instead, he continued toward home, listening to increasingly urgent weather reports on the radio. The storm was now expected to arrive by 6 p.m., several hours earlier than the latest predictions. Rainfall amounts had been revised upward, and flash flood warnings were being issued for all low-lying areas. Near mountain streams and rivers. The house felt empty when he arrived. It always did when Emma wasn't there, but today the silence seemed more pronounced. Marcus made himself a sandwich and tried to focus on paperwork from the construction site, but his attention kept drifting to the weather reports. By 2 p.m., the first drops of rain began to fall. By 2:30, it was a steady drizzle. By 3 o'clock, it was a driving rain that hammered against the windows and sent water cascading off the roof in sheets. Marcus checked his watch. 3:25. Mrs. Patterson would be picking up Emma in 5 minutes. The drive from the school to their house took about 10 minutes in normal weather, maybe 15 in this rain. Emma would be home by 4 p.m. at the latest, but 4 o'clock came and went with no sign of them. Marcus tried calling Mrs. Patterson's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried the school's main office, but the line was busy. Outside, the rain was coming down harder than he'd seen in years. By 4:30, Marcus was genuinely worried. He grabbed his truck keys and rain jacket, preparing to drive to the school himself. But as he opened his front door, headlights appeared in his driveway. Mrs. Patterson's old Honda pulled up, windshield wipers working frantically against the torrential rain. Emma burst out of the passenger side door and ran toward the house, laughing as she got soaked in the few seconds it took to reach the porch. "Sorry we're late," Mrs. Patterson called out through her partially opened window. "Had to wait for the rain to calm down enough to see the road. This storm came out of nowhere." Marcus waved his thanks and watched her drive away, then ushered Emma inside. She was dripping wet, but excited by the adventure of driving through what she described as the biggest rainstorm ever. It was like being inside a waterfall, Daddy. The wipers couldn't keep up, and Mrs. Patterson had to drive really slow because she couldn't see the road. And you should see the river. It looks like chocolate milk. Marcus helped Emma out of her wet clothes and into dry ones, listening to her enthusiastic description of their journey through the storm. But her casual mention of the river's appearance concerned him. When the Cascade River turned brown, it meant significant runoff from the mountains. Combined with this amount of rainfall, it could mean serious flooding downstream. He turned on the local news, and his concerns were immediately validated. The meteorologist was standing in front of a map showing the storm system, which had intensified even further since the morning forecasts. This is now being classified as a 100-year storm event, the meteorologist was saying. Rainfall amounts of 4 to 6 inches are expected over the next 12 hours, with higher amounts possible in the mountains. All residents in flood-prone areas are advised to move to higher ground immediately. The camera switched to a live shot of Main Street in Cedar Falls, where water was already beginning to pool in the lower areas near the river. The usually peaceful Cascade River was now a raging torrent, brown with sediment and debris from the mountains. Emma pressed her face against the living room window, watching the rain with fascination rather than fear. At 8 years old, she didn't fully understand the potential danger. To her, it was just the most exciting weather event she'd ever witnessed. "Can we go outside and play in the puddles?" she asked hopefully. "Not today, sweetheart. This isn't regular rain. We need to stay inside where it's safe." Marcus's phone rang. It was Jake Morrison. "Marcus, you need to know. The river's rising faster than anyone expected. They're evacuating the lower areas of town right now. The bridge construction site is already under 3 feet of water." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Through the window, Marcus could see that their neighborhood was still dry. The house sat on a hill overlooking the valley, well above any potential flood zone. They were safe here, but something about the intensity of this storm, the way it had developed so quickly and unpredictably, made him uneasy. He'd lived in the Pacific Northwest his entire life, but he'd never seen weather quite like this. As if sensing his thoughts, Emma looked up from the window. "Daddy, what if people need help down there?" It was such a simple question, but it hit Marcus unexpectedly hard. His first instinct was to tell her that other people's problems weren't their concern, that they needed to focus on taking care of themselves. But looking at his daughter's earnest face, he realized how that would sound. There are people whose job it is to help in situations like this. Police officers, firefighters, emergency workers. They're trained for this kind of thing. Emma nodded, accepting this explanation, but continued watching the storm with obvious concern for anyone who might be caught in it. By 6 p.m., the rain had intensified to levels that Marcus had never experienced. The sound against the roof was deafening, and water was running off their property in rivers. The local emergency services radio frequency crackled with constant reports of flooding, stranded motorists, and evacuation orders. Marcus made dinner while listening to the emergency reports. The situation in town was deteriorating rapidly. The Cascade River had overflowed its banks and was flooding the entire lower section of Cedar Falls. Several families had already been evacuated from their homes, and more evacuations were likely. "The river's never been this high," one emergency responder was saying over the radio. "We're dealing with water levels we've never seen before. The current is incredibly strong. Anyone who falls in would be in immediate danger." Emma ate her dinner quietly, occasionally glancing toward the windows where the storm continued its relentless assault. The excitement she'd felt earlier was gradually being replaced by a more subdued awareness that this wasn't just a fun weather event. "Daddy," she said quietly, "are we going to be okay?" Marcus looked at his daughter, seeing the maturity in her eyes that sometimes surprised him. At 8 years old, she'd already experienced more upheaval than most children her age. Her mother's abandonment, the adjustment to being raised by a single father, the constant awareness that it was just the two of them against the world. "We're going to be fine, sweetheart. Our house is safe, we have plenty of food and water, and the storm will pass." "It always does." Emma nodded, trusting him completely. That trust was both a comfort and a weight. She depended on him for everything: safety, security, understanding of the world around them. He'd built their life to be as predictable and secure as possible, specifically so she'd never have to worry about the kind of uncertainty that had shattered their family 3 years ago. Outside, the storm raged on with no sign of letting up. And somewhere in the darkness and rain, the woman he'd noticed earlier that day was about to become a part of their story in a way that neither of them could possibly imagine. The power went out at 7:43 p.m. One moment Emma was reading her book by the living room lamp, and the next they were plunged into complete darkness. The sudden silence was almost as startling as the blackout. No humming refrigerator, no gentle whir of the heating system, just the relentless drumming of rain against the windows. "Stay right where you are, Em," Marcus called out, feeling his way toward the kitchen where he kept a flashlight in the emergency drawer. His fingers found the familiar shape, and a beam of light cut through the darkness. Emma hadn't moved from her spot on the couch, but her eyes were wide in the flashlight beam. "Is this part of the storm too?" "Yeah, sweetheart. Sometimes strong. Winds knock down power lines." Marcus tried to keep his voice calm, but internally he was calculating. No power meant no heat, no way to cook, no communication except for his cell phone, which was already showing only 2 bars of service. He gathered candles from various rooms, creating small islands of warm light throughout the house. Emma helped, carrying the battery-powered radio while Marcus set up their improvised lighting system. The radio crackled with emergency broadcasts, painting a picture of a town under siege. Highway 101 is completely flooded between mile markers 15 and 23. The emergency coordinator was reporting. Several vehicles are stranded and rescue crews are en route. The Cascade River has reached record levels and is still rising. All residents in Zones A and B should evacuate immediately to higher ground. Marcus knew Zones A and B covered the entire downtown area and the neighborhoods closest to the river. That included the school, the main shopping district, and dozens of residential streets. Hundreds of people were being forced from their homes in the middle of the worst storm in decades. Emma sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by candles like a small campfire. "Daddy, where will all those people go?" "There's an emergency shelter set up at the high school," Marcus replied, though he wondered how many people the shelter could actually accommodate. Cedar Falls High School was on higher ground, but it wasn't designed to house hundreds of displaced residents. The radio continued its stream of urgent updates. Water rescue teams were being deployed. The National Guard had been contacted. Several roads leading out of town were now impassable. Cedar Falls was effectively cut off from the outside world. At 8:15 p.m., Marcus's cell phone rang. The caller ID showed Jake Morrison's number. "Marcus, thank God you answered. Cell service is spotty everywhere. Listen, we've got a problem at the construction site." "What kind of problem?" Marcus asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. "The temporary bridge we built for equipment access, it's gone. The river took it out about an hour ago. But that's not the worst part. There were 3 people on the other side. When it went down, they're stranded on the north bank with no way to get across." Marcus felt his stomach drop. The north bank of the Cascade River was completely isolated now. During normal conditions, there were 2 ways to reach it: the temporary bridge they'd constructed for the project, and an old logging road that connected to the state highway about 12 miles upstream. But if the main highway was flooded, That logging road would be underwater too. Who's stranded over there? The Hendricks family. Tom, Sarah, and their teenage son, David. They were checking on their cabin when the bridge went out. The water's rising so fast they can't get back to their car. It's already half submerged. Marcus closed his eyes, thinking. Tom Hendricks owned a local hardware store and had been supplying materials for the bridge project. Sarah taught second grade at the elementary school. David was a junior at the high school, captain of the soccer team. They were good people, pillars of the small community. What are the authorities saying? That's just it. They're completely overwhelmed. Every rescue team in the county is dealing with emergencies. The Coast Guard helicopter can't fly in this weather. Nobody can get to them until the storm passes and the water goes down. How long could that be? The weather service is saying the rain won't let up until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. And the river won't start receding for hours after that. We're talking about at least 18 to 20 hours, maybe longer. Emma looked up from her book, sensing the tension in her father's voice. Marcus walked into the kitchen, lowering his voice. What about their supplies? Food, water, shelter. The cabin's stocked with some basics, but it's not set up for winter occupancy. No heat except for a wood-burning stove, minimal food supplies. And Marcus, the cabin's only about 8 feet above the current water level. If the river keeps rising... quotes Jake, didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus understood the implications. The Hendricks family wasn't just stranded, they were in real danger. There's got to be something we can do, Marcus said. But even as he spoke, he knew how limited their options were. He was a construction manager, not a rescue worker. He had responsibilities to his own daughter, his own safety. I've been racking my brain, but I can't think of anything. The current's too strong for any kind of boat. The water's too deep and too fast for wading. And even if someone could somehow get across, how would they get back with 3 people? After ending the call, Marcus stood in his darkened kitchen, listening to the storm rage outside. Emma was safe, warm, and secure in their house on the hill. That should be his only concern. That was what he'd promised himself 3 years ago when Emma's mother left, that he'd focus entirely on protecting and providing for his daughter. No distractions, no complications, no taking on other people's problems. But the image of the Hendricks family trapped in a cold cabin, watching the water rise around them, wouldn't leave his mind. Daddy? Emma's voice came from the living room. You look worried. Is everything okay? Marcus returned to the circle of candlelight, sitting down beside his daughter. Some people are stranded by the flooding. Everyone's trying to figure out how to help them. Emma nodded solemnly. At 8 years old, she had an intuitive understanding of danger and compassion that sometimes surprised him. Are they scared? Probably. But they're safe for now, and people are working on ways to help them. Like who? It was such a simple question, but it highlighted the problem. Like who indeed? The regular emergency services were overwhelmed. The weather was too severe for helicopter rescue. The geography made ground-based rescue nearly impossible. I don't know yet, Em, but someone will figure it out. Emma accepted this answer and returned to her book, but Marcus could see her processing the information. She'd grown up hearing her father's philosophy that they only needed each other, that depending on others was a recipe for disappointment. But she'd also inherited a natural empathy that sometimes put her at odds with that worldview. At 9:30 p.m., the radio brought news that made Marcus's blood run cold. We're receiving reports that the river level has risen another 2 feet in the past hour. The rate of increase is accelerating, not slowing down as initially predicted. This is now officially the worst flooding event in Cedar Falls history. Marcus did quick mental calculations. If the cabin was 8 feet above the previous water level, and the river had already risen significantly since the Hendricks family became stranded, they might have only a few feet of safety margin left. Maybe less. His phone buzzed with a text. Message from Jake. River still rising. The cabin is now maybe 4 to 5 feet above the waterline. I need to do something soon. Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, her book open beside her. Marcus covered her with a blanket and sat in his recliner, staring out at the storm-lashed darkness. He'd built his life around the principle of self-reliance, of not taking unnecessary risks, of focusing solely on what he could control. But what happened when the safe choice conflicted with the right choice? At 10:15 p.m., his phone rang again. This time it wasn't Jake. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Is this Marcus Dalton?" The voice was female, crisp and professional. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Rebecca Stone. I'm a search and rescue specialist." "I understand you're the project manager for the Morrison Bridge construction." Marcus sat up straighter. "That's right. How did you get this number?" "Jake Morrison gave it to me. I'm here in Cedar Falls, and I've been briefed on the situation with the stranded family. I need to know everything you can tell me about the terrain, the water conditions, and the access points on both sides of the river." Rebecca Stone, the woman he'd seen outside the hardware store that afternoon, studying the sky with the focused attention of a professional. She wasn't a tourist after all. "Are you with the County Rescue Service?" Marcus asked. "Not exactly. I work for a private search and rescue organization, but we coordinate with local authorities. I was in the area on another assignment when this storm hit. Right now, I'm the closest qualified rescue specialist to your location." Marcus felt a spark of hope for the first time since Jake's phone call. "What do you need to know?" For the next 20 minutes, Rebecca grilled him about every detail of the bridge project, the river conditions, the terrain on both sides, and the exact location of the cabin where the Hendricks family was stranded. Her questions were precise, technical, and revealed a deep understanding of water rescue operations. "Based on what you're telling me, a conventional boat rescue is impossible," she concluded. "The current's too strong, and there are too many submerged obstacles. A helicopter extraction won't work in this weather. So what are the options?" There was a long pause. "There might be one possibility, but it's extremely dangerous and would require precise coordination. I'd need someone who knows the terrain intimately and can handle technical equipment under pressure." "What kind of coordination?" "I'd need to set up a highline rescue system, essentially a zip line across the river. But the anchor points would have to be perfect, the measurements exact, and the timing flawless. One mistake and everyone involved could end up in the river." Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate. "What would you need from me?" "Everything. You know the construction site better than anyone. You know where the strongest anchor points would be. You understand load calculations and safety factors. Without local expertise, there's no way to make this work." Marcus looked over at Emma, sleeping peacefully on the couch. Getting involved in a dangerous rescue operation was the exact opposite of everything he'd promised himself about keeping their life simple and safe. But the alternative was leaving 3 people to die. "There's something else you need to know," Rebecca continued. "The weather reports are getting worse. This storm system is stalled over the mountains, and it's intensifying instead of moving through. The river could rise another 3 to 4 feet before it crests. The cabin where they're stranded won't survive that. How long do we have?" "Best case scenario, 6 hours, maybe less." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. Help with the rescue and potentially leave Emma orphaned if something went wrong. Stay safe at home and let 3 people die when he might have been able to save them. "Mr. Dalton, are you still there?" "I'm here. Just thinking. I understand this is a difficult decision, but I need to know soon. Setting up the equipment will take several hours, and we're running out of darkness to work under cover." "Cover? Why does that matter?" "Because what we're planning isn't exactly approved by the local emergency management office. They've classified this as too dangerous for official rescue attempts. If we're going to do this, it has to be unofficial. Marcus felt his world shift. Rebecca wasn't talking about a sanctioned rescue operation with backup teams and safety protocols. She was talking about a rogue mission that could get them both arrested or killed. I need a few minutes to think about this. You have 15 minutes, Rebecca said. After that, I'm going to have to try something else, and the chances of success will be much lower. The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone with his sleeping daughter and the hardest decision of his life. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault on Cedar Falls, and somewhere in the darkness, 3 people were running out of time. Marcus stood at his kitchen window, watching sheets of rain slash across the glass in the candlelight's reflection. 15 minutes to decide whether to risk everything or let 3 people die. The weight of the choice pressed down on him like the storm itself. Emma stirred on the couch, mumbling something in her sleep about fireflies. Just hours ago, she'd been chasing those same fireflies in their backyard, laughing without a care in the world. Now she was sleeping through what might be the most important decision of both their lives. His phone buzzed. A text from Jake. Water's at the cabin door now. Maybe 2 hours left, max. 2 hours. Rebecca had said they needed 6 hours minimum to set up the rescue system. The timeline was collapsing faster than anyone had anticipated. Marcus's hands were shaking as he dialed Rebecca's number. She answered on the first ring. Dalton. I need to know exactly what you're asking me to do, Marcus said quietly, glancing toward Emma to make sure his voice hadn't woken her. Fair enough. The plan is to establish 2 anchor points, one on each side of the river at the narrowest crossing point near your construction site. We'll use a high-tensile cable system to create a zip line spanning the water. I'll cross over to the cabin, evacuate the family one at a time back across the cable. What's my role in this? You know the construction site's layout in the dark. You understand load calculations and structural integrity. Most importantly, you have access to the heavy equipment and materials we'll need. Without you, this doesn't work. Marcus closed his eyes. And if something goes wrong? Then we probably all end up in the river. I won't lie to you. This is extremely dangerous. The margin for error is essentially 0. Why are you willing to take this risk for people you don't even know? There was a pause before Rebecca answered. Because it's what I do. I've been doing search and rescue for 12 years, and I've never walked away from someone I could save, regardless of the risk. But I need a partner who's completely committed, not someone who's going to hesitate at a crucial moment. Marcus looked at Emma again, so small and vulnerable in the candlelight. Everything he'd built over the past 3 years had been designed to protect her from exactly this kind of chaos and uncertainty. He'd promised himself after her mother left that he'd never again put Emma in a position where she might lose the one person she depended on. But he also thought about David Hendricks, probably no more than 16 or 17 years old, watching the water rise around the cabin and wondering if he'd ever see another sunrise. About Tom and Sarah Hendricks, facing the possibility that their son might die, because no one was willing to take a risk to save them. If I help you, Marcus said. Slowly, Emma comes with us. Absolutely not. Rebecca's response was immediate and firm. This is going to be dangerous enough without having a child at the site. She stays home where she's safe. She doesn't stay anywhere without me. That's non-negotiable. Then find someone else to watch her. In the middle of the night during the worst storm in the town's history, there's no one else. Mrs. Patterson's elderly and lives in a flood zone. My crew lives too far away. Emma comes with us, or I don't help. The silence stretched out between them. Marcus could hear the storm intensifying, if that was even possible. Finally, Rebecca spoke. The construction site is going to be a chaos of wind, rain, and heavy machinery operating in the dark. It's no place for a child. Emma's been around construction sites her whole life. She knows how to stay safe, how to follow instructions. And I can't focus on the rescue if I'm worried about her being alone here with no power and no communication. Another long pause. She stays in the truck no matter what. And if I tell you to get her out of there, you do it immediately. Agreed. 15 minutes, Rebecca said. Meet me at the Morrison Bridge construction site. Bring heavy-duty cable, winches, and anything else you think we might need for anchor points. The line went dead. Marcus stood in his kitchen, realizing he'd just committed to the most dangerous thing he'd ever attempted. But as he looked at Emma sleeping peacefully on the couch, he knew it was also the right thing. He gently shook her awake. Sweetheart, we need to go help some people. Emma rubbed her eyes, immediately alert despite having been sound asleep moments before. What kind of help? Remember the people I told you about who are stranded by the flood? We're going to help get them to safety. In the storm? Yes, in the storm. It's going to be loud and wet, and probably a little scary, but you'll be safe. In the truck the whole time. Do you trust me? Emma nodded without hesitation. At 8 years old, she trusted her father completely, and Marcus felt the full weight of that trust as they prepared to venture into the worst storm either of them had ever experienced. They dressed in their heaviest rain gear, waterproof jackets, insulated boots, wool hats. Marcus packed a bag with extra clothes for Emma, snacks, water, and the battery-powered radio. He also grabbed his construction tool belt and safety equipment from the garage. The drive to the construction site was harrowing. The rain was coming down so hard that the truck's wipers couldn't keep up, forcing Marcus to drive at less than 20 miles per hour with his hazard lights flashing. Emma sat buckled in beside him, watching the storm with wide eyes but no apparent fear. Daddy, how are we going to help them if the water's so deep? There's a very brave woman who's going to cross the river on a cable, like a zip line. My job is to help set it up safely. Like at the playground? Sort of, but much more complicated and dangerous. Emma absorbed this information with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children often show in extraordinary circumstances. To her, if her father said they were going to help people, then that's what they were going to do. The construction site was a disaster. What had been an organized work area that morning was now partially underwater, with equipment and materials scattered by the flood. Marcus's truck headlights cut through the rain and darkness, revealing a landscape transformed by the storm. Rebecca's vehicle was already there, a rugged SUV loaded with rescue equipment. She emerged from the driver's side wearing full rain gear and carrying a large waterproof case. Even in the storm, her movements were precise and purposeful. Marcus rolled down his window. Where do you want to set up? Rebecca jogged over, rain streaming off her jacket. I've identified the anchor points. The north side will be that concrete pier you built for the new bridge foundation. The south side will be the oak tree about 50 yards upstream. It's the only thing on this side strong enough to handle the load. Marcus evaluated the distances and angles in his mind. That's almost a 200-foot span. The cable's going to have significant sag in the middle. I know. The angle won't be ideal, but it's the only option. Can your equipment handle setting up anchors at both points? Yeah, but it's going to take time to position everything in this weather. How much time? Marcus looked out at the site, calculating what needed to be done. Moving the crane into position, setting up the winch systems, running cable across a raging river in near-zero visibility. 3 hours minimum. We don't have 3 hours. The water's rising too fast. As if to emphasize the point, Marcus's phone buzzed with another text from Jake. Cabin floor is flooded. Families in the loft now, maybe 90 minutes left. Rebecca saw the text over Marcus's shoulder. We're going to have to take shortcuts, accept higher risks. Are you okay with that? Marcus looked back at Emma, who was watching them through the rear window of the truck. Her small face was serious but trusting, waiting for her father to do whatever needed to be done. Yeah, he said. Let's do this. The next hour was a blur of dangerous, precise work in impossible conditions. Marcus used the site's crane to position anchor points while Rebecca rigged the cable system with the expertise of someone who'd done similar rescues dozens of times. Emma stayed in the truck as promised, occasionally offering encouragement through the radio system they'd set up. "Daddy, the radio says the storm's getting worse." Emma's voice crackled through the static. Marcus paused in his work, looking up at the sky. She was right. If anything, the rain was intensifying. He'd never seen weather like this in Oregon. "Copy that, Em. We're almost ready." By 2 a.m., they had the basic system in place. A steel cable stretched across the churning river, anchored to the concrete pier on the north side and the massive oak tree on the south. The cable disappeared into the darkness and rain, leading to a cabin they could no longer see but knew was running out of time. Rebecca tested the system with her full weight, bouncing on the cable to check its stability. "It'll hold, but barely. The sag in the middle means I'll be traveling through the spray zone above the river. If I fall, the current will take me before either of us can react. Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked. "Maybe we should wait for official rescue teams." "There aren't any official rescue teams available, and there won't be until the storm passes. By then, it'll be too late." Rebecca finished her equipment check: full-body harness, pulleys designed for high-speed descents, emergency flotation device, waterproof communication system. She looked like she was preparing for a military operation, not a civilian rescue. "Once I'm across, I'll evaluate the situation and radio back. If the cabin's more compromised than we thought, I might have to make some quick decisions about who to evacuate first." The implication was clear. If the cabin was collapsing, she might not be able to save all 3 people. "How will you get them across?" Marcus asked. "They're not trained for this. Tandem harness system. I'll clip them to me and we'll traverse together. It's going to be terrifying for them, but it's their only chance." Marcus watched Rebecca make final adjustments to her gear, her movements calm and methodical despite the chaos around them. He'd spent his entire adult life avoiding exactly this kind of situation, depending on others, taking risks he couldn't control, putting his daughter in proximity to danger. But watching Rebecca prepare to risk her life for strangers, he realized there was something profoundly wrong with his philosophy of pure self-reliance. Some situations were too big for any one person to handle alone. Some problems required people to trust each other, to take risks for others, to be part of something larger than their own immediate safety. "Rebecca," he called out as she prepared to clip onto the cable, "why are you really doing this?" She paused, rain streaming down her face. 5 years ago, I was trapped in a flash flood in Colorado. A complete stranger risked his life to pull me out of the water. He didn't know me, didn't owe me anything, but he refused to let me drown. I became a search and rescue specialist because of that man. What happened to him? He made it out okay. But he taught me that sometimes the difference between life and death is whether someone's willing to take a risk for a stranger. Tonight, I'm that someone." Rebecca clipped her harness to the cable and tested her grip on the pulley system. "If something goes wrong, if the cable fails or I fall, you get Emma out of here immediately. Don't try to help me. Don't wait around to see what happens. Just go." Marcus nodded, though he knew he'd never be able to follow that instruction if it came to it. Rebecca pushed off from the concrete pier and disappeared into the storm, sliding down the cable toward the flooded cabin and 3 people who were counting on a woman they'd never met to save their lives. Marcus watched her go, then turned back toward his truck where Emma was waiting. His phone showed 2:17 a.m. According to Jake's last estimate, they had maybe an hour left before the cabin was completely underwater. The rescue had officially begun, and there was no turning back now. Rebecca's voice crackled through the radio, barely audible over the storm's roar. "I'm halfway across. Cable's holding, but the wind is brutal up here." Marcus gripped the radio tighter, his eyes straining to catch any glimpse of her through the rain and darkness. The cable disappeared into the void about 50 feet from the anchor point, swallowed by the storm. Emma pressed against the truck's window, trying to see what was happening. "Daddy, where is she?" "Out there in the dark, sweetheart. She's being very brave to help those people." The radio crackled again. "Jesus Christ, sorry about the language. The river's moving faster than anything I've ever seen. I can feel the spray coming up through the bottom of the cable system." Marcus felt his heart hammering. The spray zone meant the river was much higher than their calculations had predicted. If Rebecca fell now, she'd hit moving water with the force of a freight train. How much farther? Marcus radioed back. "Maybe 60 feet. I can see a light in the cabin window. They're still alive." "But Marcus, the water's lapping at the cabin's foundation logs. This place is going to be underwater within the hour." 45 minutes. They'd lost half their remaining time just getting Rebecca across. Marcus ran calculations in his head. Even if everything went perfectly, evacuating 3 people at a time would take at least 90 minutes. The math wasn't working. Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, what's that sound?" Marcus listened, trying to identify what she was hearing over the storm's cacophony. Then he heard it too, a deep, rumbling crack that seemed to come from the earth itself. "Rebecca, did you hear that noise?" "Copy that. I think it's trees coming down upstream. The soil's completely saturated, and the wind's getting stronger. I need to move faster." The radio went silent as Rebecca covered the final distance to the cabin. Marcus watched the seconds tick by on his phone's clock, each one bringing the trapped family closer to disaster. Emma sat quietly beside him, somehow understanding that this was a moment that required silence. "I'm at the cabin." Rebecca's voice was strained but triumphant. "The family's okay, but they're scared as hell. Water's coming through the floorboards. Now they've got maybe 20 minutes before this place goes under. 20 minutes. Marcus felt the timeline collapsing around them. Even if Rebecca could get one person across immediately, there wouldn't be time for 2 more trips. "Rebecca, the math isn't working. You can't make 3 trips in 20 minutes. "I know. I'm going to have to modify the plan. Tom Hendricks says he can handle the crossing if I show him how. Sarah and the boy will go first. Then Tom and I will come together on the last trip." Marcus felt his blood run cold. Asking an untrained civilian to make that crossing in these conditions was essentially a death sentence. Tom Hendricks was a 60-year-old hardware store owner, not an extreme sports athlete. "That's too dangerous. He'll never make it." "It's the only option we have, unless you've got a better idea." Marcus looked out at the storm, his mind racing through alternatives. The crane could reach partway across the river, but not far enough to matter. The construction site had boats, but they were stored in a warehouse that was now underwater. Every conventional solution had been eliminated by the sheer violence of the flood. "I'm coming across," Marcus said, the words leaving his mouth before he'd fully thought them through. "What? No, absolutely not. 2 experienced people can evacuate 3 civilians faster than 1. I'll cross over, help you organize them, and we'll bring them back in pairs." "Marcus, you're not trained for this. One mistake and you're dead." "I'm a construction worker. I've been working at heights my whole career. I can handle it." Emma grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with sudden understanding. "Daddy, no, don't leave me." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. This was exactly what he'd spent 3 years trying to avoid, putting Emma in a position where she might lose her only parent. But looking out at the storm, he knew Rebecca couldn't save 3 people alone. Not in the time they had left. Sweetheart, I need you to be braver than you've ever been in your life. I have to help those people, but I'll be back. I promise I'll be back. What if you fall in the water like she almost did?" Marcus knelt down so he was at Emma's eye level. "Remember what I always tell you? That I'll never leave you, no matter What? Emma nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. I mean that. I will come back to you. But right now, there are people who need help, and I'm the only one who can give it to them. The radio crackled. Marcus, the cabin just shifted. The foundation's giving way. If you're coming, it has to be now. Marcus looked at his daughter, seeing a maturity in her face that no 8-year-old should have to possess. Can you be my brave girl while I'm gone? Can you stay in the truck and keep watch on the radio? Emma wiped her eyes and nodded. I can do it, Daddy. Marcus kissed her forehead, then grabbed his safety harness and rain gear. If anything bad happens, if you get scared or the storm gets worse, you call Mrs. Patterson on this radio. Channel 7. Can you remember that? Channel 7, I remember. Marcus clipped his harness to the cable system, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted the pulley mechanism. He'd worked at heights for 15 years, but never in conditions like this. The wind was trying to knock him sideways, and the rain was so intense he could barely see the cable in front of him. Testing radio contact, he said into his headset. I hear you. Rebecca's voice came back immediately. Marcus, listen to me very carefully. The cable's going to want to throw you around. Don't fight it, go with the motion, but keep your grip tight. The middle section is going to be the worst because of the sag. You'll drop about 15 feet before the cable starts supporting you again. Copy that. Marcus took one last look at Emma, giving her what he hoped was a reassuring smile. Then he pushed off from the concrete pier and slid into the storm. The first 50 feet weren't too bad. The cable was relatively stable, and he could still see the lights from his truck behind him. But as he reached the point where the cable began to sag, everything changed. The wind hit him like a living thing, trying to spin him sideways and tear his hands from the pulley system. The rain was no longer falling down, it was moving horizontally, creating a wall of water that made breathing difficult. And below him, he could hear the roar of the flooded river, much closer than it should have been. Middle section is coming up, Rebecca's voice warned through his earpiece. Hold tight. The cable sagged dramatically, and Marcus felt himself falling through space for a terrifying moment, before the tension caught him again. He was now close enough to the river that spray was hitting his face, the water shockingly cold despite the mild air temperature. Holy hell, he gasped into the radio. Keep moving, Rebecca urged. You're doing great, but don't stop. The longer you stay in that zone, the more dangerous it gets. Marcus pulled himself hand over hand along the cable, his arms already burning from the effort. Behind him, his truck looked impossibly small and distant. Ahead, he could see the faint glow of a flashlight, Rebecca signaling his approach to the cabin. Almost there, she called out. 30 more feet. Those 30 feet felt like 300. The wind seemed to be intensifying, and Marcus could hear trees crashing down somewhere upstream. But finally, incredibly, he felt solid wood beneath his feet as he reached the cabin's small porch. Rebecca was there immediately, helping him unclip from the cable system. Nice work. How are you feeling? Terrified and exhilarated. How are our passengers? Scared, but ready to go. Tom's determined to make the crossing himself. Sarah's worried about David. And David's trying to act brave, but he's just a kid. Marcus looked around the cabin, taking in the situation. Water was seeping through the floorboards, and the entire structure was creaking ominously with each gust of wind. Through the windows, he could see that the water level had risen dramatically just in the time it took him to cross. How long do we have? 10 minutes, maybe 15 if we're lucky. The whole foundation is undermined. When this place goes, it's going to go fast. Tom Hendricks stepped forward, a weathered man in his 60s with the steady demeanor of someone who'd faced challenges before. Mr. Dalton, I appreciate you risking your life to help us. What's the plan? Sarah and David go first, together with Rebecca. Then you and I follow immediately after. We can't afford to wait between crossings. Sarah Hendricks was holding her teenage son protectively, both of them trying to hide their fear. David was tall for his age, probably about 5'8", with the lean build of a soccer player. But despite his athletic appearance, his eyes showed the terror of someone facing their first life-or-death situation. "Mrs. Hendricks," Marcus said gently, "I know this is frightening, but Rebecca is an expert. She's done this type of rescue many times before. You just have to trust her and follow her instructions exactly." Sarah nodded, though her hands were shaking. "Will David be safe?" "He'll be clipped to Rebecca the entire time. They'll cross together, and she won't let anything happen to him." Rebecca was already preparing the tandem harness system, working with the efficiency of someone performing a routine procedure despite the chaos around them. "Sarah, you and David will be attached to me with a double clip system. Even if one connection fails, the backup will hold. But I need you both to stay calm and follow my lead." The cabin shuddered as another gust of wind hit it, and everyone froze as they listened to the structure protest. Through the floorboards, they could see water beginning to pool. "Time to go," Rebecca announced. "Marcus, get ready to help Tom with his harness as soon as we're clear." She clipped Sarah and David into the tandem system, checking each connection twice. The two civilians looked small and vulnerable against her professional rescue gear. "Remember," Rebecca told them, "don't look down. Don't try to help by moving around. Just hang on and let the equipment do the work." She guided them to the edge of the porch where the cable was anchored. Sarah closed her eyes tightly, but David kept them open, staring out into the storm with a mixture of terror and fascination. "Here we go," Rebecca said, and pushed off into the night. Marcus and Tom watched them disappear into the darkness, the sound of the pulley system quickly swallowed by the storm. They were alone now in a cabin that was slowly being consumed by the flood, waiting for their turn to make a crossing that would determine whether they lived or died. Tom looked at Marcus with a wry smile. Hell of a way to spend a Tuesday night. Before Marcus could respond, the cabin lurched sideways with a grinding crack. The foundation had shifted again, and this time it didn't settle back into place. "That's not good," Tom observed with remarkable calm. Marcus's radio crackled. "We're across. Starting back for you now. But Marcus, you need to know, the cable's stretching. It's about 3 feet lower on this side than when we started. The return trip is going to be much closer to the water. 3 feet lower." That meant the middle section of the cable, the part where Marcus had felt spray hitting his face, would now be directly in the river's spray zone, maybe even touching the water at the lowest point. Tom heard the radio transmission and nodded grimly. Still better odds than staying here. Another crack from beneath them, and this time Marcus could see the cabin's walls shifting relative to each other. The flood hadn't just undermined the foundation. It was actively tearing the building apart. "Rebecca, how much longer?" Marcus radioed. 2 minutes out. "Get Tom ready to clip in immediately." Marcus helped Tom into the harness system, explaining the basics of how to grip the pulley and position his body. Tom listened intently, asking practical questions that showed he understood the seriousness of their situation. "The hardest part is going to be the middle section," Marcus explained. "The cable sags down toward the water. We might actually get wet, but the important thing is to keep moving. Don't stop, don't panic. Just pull yourself across as fast as you can." Tom tested his grip on the pulley handles. "Son, I've been running a hardware store for 30 years. I understand mechanical systems. This is just a very dangerous version of something I've seen before." Rebecca's voice came through the radio. "I'm at the cable anchor. Send Tom over now, Marcus to follow in 30 seconds. This was it. Marcus watched Tom clip onto the cable and push off into the storm. The older man moved more slowly than Rebecca had, but with steady determination. Within moments, he disappeared into the rain and darkness. Marcus was alone in the disintegrating cabin, listening to it tear itself apart around him. Water was now covering the floor to a depth of several inches, and he could feel the entire structure swaying with each wind. "Gust, your turn, Marcus," Rebecca's voice urged. "But be warned, the cable's even lower now. You're going to get soaked in that middle section." Marcus clipped in and moved to the edge of the porch. Behind him, the cabin groaned and shifted, timbers snapping under impossible stress. Ahead of him lay 200 feet of cable disappearing into a storm that seemed determined to kill anyone foolish enough to challenge it. He thought about Emma, waiting in the truck, trusting him to come back to her. He thought about the promise he'd made 3 years ago to never put her at risk of losing her only parent. And he thought about the choice he'd made tonight to help strangers, even though it went against everything he'd believed about self-reliance and safety. "I'm coming home, Em," he whispered, and pushed off into the storm. The moment Marcus pushed off from the cabin's porch, he knew this crossing would be different. The cable felt wrong, looser, more unstable than his journey over. Within the first 20 feet, he could tell the system was failing. "Rebecca, the cable's moving too much," he radioed, gripping the pulley handles with white knuckles as wind tried to spin him sideways. "I know. The anchor points are shifting from the repeated stress. Just keep moving and don't stop for anything." Behind him, Marcus heard a tremendous crack followed by a splash. He risked a glance back and saw that part of the cabin's roof had collapsed into the flood. Tom had gotten out just in time. The first 100 feet went reasonably well. But as Marcus approached the middle section where the cable sagged lowest, the true horror of their situation became clear. The river had risen so much that the cable was now actually dipping into the water at its lowest point. "Rebecca, I'm going to hit the river," Marcus called out, trying to keep panic out of his voice. "I see it. When you reach the water, don't fight it. Let yourself get wet, but keep pulling. The current will try to drag you downstream, but the cable will hold you. Just don't let go. Don't let go." Easy to say from dry land. Marcus could see the churning brown water directly ahead of him now, full of debris, tree branches, pieces of buildings, things he couldn't identify in the darkness. The river looked like a living monster, eager to swallow anything that fell into its grasp. Then he hit the water. The shock was immediate and overwhelming. The river was ice cold, moving with incredible force and full of objects that slammed into his body as the current tried to sweep him away. The cable held, but barely, and Marcus found himself fighting not just to move forward, but to keep his head above water as waves crashed over him. "Still there, Marcus?" Rebecca's voice was tense. "Still here," Marcus gasped, though breathing was nearly impossible with water constantly washing over his face. "But this cable's not going to last much longer." He could feel the vibrations through the steel wire. The anchor points were definitely shifting. Every gust of wind, every wave that hit him, every inch he pulled himself forward, put additional stress on a system that was already at its breaking point. The water was full of debris. A tree branch the size of his arm slammed into his ribs, nearly knocking the wind out of him. Something that might have been part of someone's deck furniture caught his leg, spinning him around until he was facing downstream and had to fight to reorient himself toward the far shore. Halfway through the water section, he radioed when he could catch his breath. "How's it looking from your end?" "The north anchor point is starting to pull loose from the concrete. I don't know how much longer it'll hold." Marcus redoubled his efforts, pulling hand over hand along the cable despite the river's attempts to drag him downstream. His arms were burning, his lungs were struggling for air, and the cold was starting to make his hands numb. But ahead, he could finally see lights, Rebecca's flashlight signaling from the shore. Suddenly, the cable jerked downward another foot. Marcus found himself completely submerged for several seconds, the current rolling him like a log while he clung desperately to the cable. When he surfaced, gasping and choking, Rebecca's voice was urgent in his earpiece. "Marcus, the anchor's failing. You've got maybe 30 seconds before the whole system comes apart. 30 seconds. Marcus looked ahead and estimated he was still 40 feet from shore. Even without the current fighting him, that would be close to the limit of what he could cover in half a minute. With water cascading over his head and debris slamming into his body, Marcus began the fastest hand-over-hand progression of his life. He ignored the burning in his arms, the numbness in his fingers, the way each breath brought river water into his lungs. He focused on one thing only, the rhythm of pull, grip, 20 feet, Rebecca called out. Keep going. Marcus could see her now, standing at the edge of the construction site with Tom beside her. Both of them had safety lines attached, ready to help pull him in if he made it close enough. Sarah and David Hendricks were there too, wrapped in emergency blankets but safe. 10 feet. Reach for the rope. Rebecca threw him a line, but the wind caught it and blew it sideways. Marcus grabbed for it and missed, the motion nearly causing him to lose his grip on the cable. The current immediately tried to sweep his legs downstream, and he could feel the cable vibrating ominously. Again. He shouted. Rebecca reeled in the rope and threw it again. This time Marcus caught it, wrapping it around his wrist just as the cable gave way completely. The sensation was indescribable. One moment he was suspended above the river. The next he was in free fall toward the churning water. The rope jerked tight around his wrist, yanking his arm hard enough that he thought it might dislocate. But it held, and Rebecca and Tom began pulling him toward shore. Marcus hit the water hard, but this time he was only a few feet from the bank. The current still tried to take him, but with both Rebecca and Tom hauling on the rope, he was able to get his feet under him and stumble out of the river onto solid ground. He collapsed immediately, water streaming from his clothes, his body shaking uncontrollably from cold and exhaustion. But he was alive. They were all alive. Jesus, Marcus, Rebecca said, kneeling beside him. I thought we lost you when that cable snapped. Is everyone okay? Marcus managed to ask through chattering teeth. Everyone's fine. Sarah and David are shaken up but unharmed. Tom's got some scrapes from his crossing, but nothing serious. Marcus struggled to sit up, his primary concern now shifting to the person he'd left behind. Emma, I need to get to. Emma. She's been watching from the truck the whole time, Rebecca said. Tom radioed her when we got him across safely. She knows you're okay. But Marcus was already struggling to his feet, driven by the need to see his daughter with his own eyes. The rescue was over, but his responsibilities as a father were just beginning again. The group made their way back toward the trucks, moving carefully across the flooded construction site. The Hendricks family stayed close together, Tom with his arm around Sarah, David walking beside them with the slightly stunned expression of someone who'd just survived something that would change him forever. Mr. Dalton, Sarah Hendricks said. As they walked, I don't know how to thank you. What you and Rebecca did tonight, risking your lives for people you barely know. Marcus didn't know how to respond. 3 hours ago, he would have said that taking such risks was foolish, that his only responsibility was to his own daughter. Now looking at this family who was alive because of choices he'd made, those old beliefs seemed hollow and selfish. Anyone would have done the same thing, he said, though he knew that wasn't true. No, Tom Hendricks said firmly. Most people would have stayed safe at home. You chose to help, even though it meant leaving your little girl and risking your life. That's not something anyone would do. That's something heroes do, heroes. Marcus had never thought of himself that way. He was just a construction worker, a single father trying to get by. But tonight had changed something fundamental in how he saw himself and his place in the world. As they approached the trucks, Marcus could see Emma's face pressed against the window, watching for him. The moment she spotted him in the headlights, she burst out of the truck and ran toward him, not caring about the rain soaking through her clothes. Daddy, she cried, throwing herself into his arms. I was so scared. The radio went quiet, and I thought something happened to you. Marcus held her tight, feeling her small body trembling against him. I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm okay. I told you. I'd come back, didn't I? Emma nodded against his chest, not letting go. I heard a loud noise when the cable broke. It sounded like thunder, but scary thunder. That's all over now. Everyone's safe. As Marcus held his daughter, Rebecca approached the Hendricks family. David Hendricks, despite being nearly twice Emma's age, looked almost as relieved to be reunited with his parents as Emma was to have her father back. Emma, Rebecca said gently, your dad was incredibly brave tonight. He saved 3 people's lives. Emma looked up at Marcus with eyes that held a new understanding. At 8 years old, she was beginning to grasp that her father was more than just the person who took care of her. He was someone capable of extraordinary courage when others needed help. I knew you would save them, Emma said simply. You always fix things when they're broken. The words hit Marcus harder than any of the debris that had slammed into him in the river. To Emma, what he'd done tonight wasn't heroic or extraordinary. It was just her father being the person she'd always believed him to be. Someone who fixed things when they were broken, who helped people when they needed help. Tom Hendricks stepped forward, still dripping wet, but smiling. Emma, your father is a hero. Because of him, I get to go home to my family tonight. Emma looked up at Marcus with obvious pride, then back at the Hendricks family. Are you the people who were stuck by the big water? That's us, Sarah said. And we're only here because your dad and Rebecca risked everything to save us. Emma absorbed this information with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. Then she looked at Rebecca. Are you a hero too? Rebecca smiled, the first time Marcus had seen her expression soften since they'd met. I just do my job. Sweetheart, but your dad, he didn't have to help tonight. He chose to, even though it meant leaving you alone and scared. That's what real heroes do. The radio in Marcus's truck crackled with an emergency broadcast. All residents of Cedar Falls, the immediate danger has passed. The river appears to have crested and is beginning to recede. However, extensive flooding remains throughout the downtown area. Residents are advised to remain in their current locations until daylight, when conditions can be properly assessed. The crisis was over. The storm was finally starting to move through the area, and the worst of the flooding had passed. But as Marcus looked around at the group of people standing in the rain, his daughter, the family they'd saved, and the woman who'd made it all possible, he realized that the real change hadn't been in the weather or the river. The change had been in him. For 3 years. He'd built his life around the principle of self-reliance, of not depending on others, of protecting Emma from the chaos and uncertainty that came with being part of a larger community. Tonight had shattered that philosophy completely. He'd depended on Rebecca's expertise to make the rescue possible. He'd relied on Tom Hendricks' courage to help evacuate his own family. He'd trusted Emma to be brave and responsible while he risked his life for strangers. And in return, all of them had come through when it mattered most. Rebecca, Marcus said, what happens now? I mean, with the rescue, the equipment, the investigation? Officially, nothing happened here tonight. The equipment will be cleaned up, the site will be restored, and 3 people will have survived a flood through pure luck. And unofficially, Rebecca smiled. Unofficially, a construction worker and a search and rescue specialist saved 3 lives using ingenuity, courage, and a willingness to risk everything for people they barely knew. But that's not a story that needs to be told to anyone else. Marcus understood. What they'd done had been necessary, but not exactly legal. The liability issues alone would have prevented any official rescue attempt. But that didn't make it any less important or meaningful. Emma tugged on his jacket. Daddy, can we go home now? I'm really tired. Marcus looked around the group one more time. The Hendricks family was safe. Rebecca would make sure all the rescue equipment was properly disposed of. The immediate crisis had passed, but as he prepared to take Emma home, Marcus realized that home might mean something different now. Not just a place where he and Emma could hide from the world's complications, but a base from which they could engage with their community, help their neighbors, and be part of something larger than just their own small family. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said, picking Emma up and carrying her toward the truck. "Let's go home." As they drove away from the construction site, Emma fell asleep in the passenger seat, exhausted by the night's events. Marcus drove slowly through the flooded streets, thinking about everything that had changed in the span of a few hours. Tomorrow, he'd have to explain to his crew why the construction site looked like a disaster zone. He'd have to deal with insurance companies and project delays and all the practical complications that came from a night like this. But tonight, driving through the aftermath of the storm with his daughter sleeping beside him, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of being part of something bigger than himself, of risking everything for others, and of discovering that he was stronger and braver than he'd ever imagined. The rain was finally starting to let up, and in the distance, Marcus could see the first hints of dawn breaking through the clouds. The storm was ending, but the changes it had brought to his life were just beginning. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the same spot where he'd anchored the rescue cable, watching his construction crew work on the new bridge foundation. The Cascade River flowed peacefully below, giving no hint of the monster it had become during the storm. Sunlight filtered through the pine trees, and the air carried the fresh scent of rain-washed earth. "Daddy, look what I found," Emma's voice called from near the riverbank. She was holding a piece of twisted metal, part of the cable system they'd used that night. Most of the equipment had been swept away by the flood, but occasional remnants still turned up in the debris. Marcus walked over and examined the metal fragment. It was barely recognizable, bent and scarred by its journey downstream. Hard to believe this piece of steel had once been part of a system that saved 3 lives. "Can we keep it?" Emma asked. "Sure, sweetheart. But why do you want it?" Emma looked at the twisted metal seriously. "So I can remember the night you became a hero." Marcus smiled, ruffling her hair. "I was always your dad, Em. That part didn't change. But now other people know you're brave too." She wasn't wrong. Word had spread through Cedar Falls about what happened that night, despite Rebecca's attempts to keep it quiet. Small towns had ways of learning their secrets, and heroic stories had a way of growing in the telling. Marcus had become something of a local celebrity, though the attention made him uncomfortable. "Mr. Dalton?" A voice called from behind them. Marcus turned to see David Hendricks approaching, looking much older than he had 3 weeks ago. The experience had changed him, adding a seriousness to his demeanor that hadn't been there before. "Hey, David. How are you doing?" "Good. Really good, actually." David glanced around the construction site, then back at Marcus. "I wanted to talk to you about something. I've been thinking a lot about what happened that night." Emma moved closer to Marcus, still shy around teenagers despite David's friendly demeanor. "What's on your mind?" Marcus asked. "I want to do what Rebecca does, search and rescue. I've been researching programs, talking to people, looking into training requirements." David's voice carried a conviction that hadn't been there before the flood. "That night showed me what I want to do with my life." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. "It's dangerous work." "Your parents okay with that?" "They're scared, obviously. But they understand why it matters to me. I mean, if people like you and Rebecca hadn't been willing to take risks, we'd all be dead right now." Emma looked up at David with obvious curiosity. "Are you going to save people like my daddy did?" "I hope so," David replied seriously. "Your dad showed me that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when others need help. I want to be that kind of person." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced when Rebecca had pushed off into The storm that night. Pride mixed with fear, hope tempered by awareness of what such choices could cost. "It's good work," Marcus said finally. "Just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons." After David left, Marcus and Emma walked back toward his truck. The construction site was returning to normal, or at least the new normal that had emerged since the flood. The project was behind schedule, but the community had rallied to help get things back on track. Volunteers had cleared debris, local businesses had donated supplies, and everyone seemed more invested in the bridge's completion than they had been before. "Daddy, are we still going to Mrs. Patterson's tonight?" Emma asked as they drove home. "That's right. Rebecca's cooking dinner for us, remember?" Emma nodded excitedly. This would be the 4th time they'd had dinner with Rebecca since the rescue. What had started as a simple thank you meal had evolved into something that looked increasingly like friendship, or maybe something more. Marcus still wasn't entirely sure how he felt about that development. For 3 years, his life had been carefully structured around just him and Emma. Adding another person to that equation felt both natural and terrifying. Rebecca's apartment was in the newer part of town, on the 2nd floor of a building that had escaped flood damage. When they arrived, she was already setting the table, moving with the same efficient precision she'd shown during the rescue. "Perfect timing," she said, greeting them at the door. "I just pulled the lasagna out of the oven." Emma ran to Rebecca and hugged her legs, a gesture that had become routine over the past few weeks. Rebecca smiled and ruffled Emma's hair, the interaction looking more natural each time. "How's the bridge project coming along?" Rebecca asked as they sat down to eat. "Better than expected, actually. The community support has been incredible. We're only about 2 weeks behind schedule now, instead of the month I was predicting." "And how are Hendricks doing?" "Tom reopened the hardware store yesterday. Sarah's back to teaching. David's become something of a local celebrity himself. Apparently he's been telling the story of the rescue to anyone who'll listen." Rebecca laughed. "At least someone's enjoying the attention." Marcus had been struggling with his newfound reputation as a local hero. People recognized him on the street, thanked him for what he'd done, treated him with a deference that felt unearned. He'd simply done what the situation required, nothing more, nothing less. "Speaking of attention," Rebecca said carefully, "I got a call today from a reporter. Someone from Portland who heard about the rescue and wants to do a story." Marcus frowned. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing, obviously." "But Marcus, this story is going to come out eventually. Small-town heroes have a way of attracting media attention, especially when the rescue involves dramatic circumstances." Emma looked up from her lasagna. "What's the media's attention?" "It means people want to tell other people about what your dad did," Rebecca explained. "Maybe put it on TV or in the newspaper." Emma's eyes widened with excitement. "Daddy's going to be on TV?" "Not if I can help it," Marcus said quickly. "We don't need that kind of attention." Rebecca studied his face. "Why does the idea of recognition make you so uncomfortable?" It was a fair question, and one Marcus had been asking himself. Why was he so resistant to acknowledgement for what he'd done? Was it modesty or something deeper? "I didn't do it for recognition," he said finally. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. Making a big deal out of it feels like it cheapens the whole thing." "Or maybe," Rebecca suggested gently, "it makes you uncomfortable because it conflicts with your image of yourself as someone who doesn't need anyone else." The observation hit uncomfortably close to home. Marcus had spent 3 years building an identity around self-reliance and independence. Being celebrated for an act that required cooperation and mutual dependence challenged that entire worldview. Emma finished her dinner and asked if she could watch TV in the living room. After she left, Rebecca and Marcus continued their conversation over coffee. "I've been thinking about that night," Rebecca said. "About what it meant, what it changed." "Everything," Marcus replied without hesitation. "It changed everything. For you maybe, For me, it was just another rescue. Dangerous, sure, but not fundamentally different from dozens of others I've done. Marcus looked at her in surprise. Just another rescue? You risked your life for 3 strangers. That's my job. That's what I do. But you had no training, no experience, no obligation to help. You did it purely because it was the right thing to do. That's much rarer than you think. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to Emma giggle at something on the television. The domestic scene felt both natural and surreal to Marcus. 3 weeks ago, his evenings had been quiet, predictable, focused entirely on Emma's needs and his own work. Now his life included dinner parties, community involvement, and the growing awareness that isolation wasn't the protection he'd thought it was. "Rebecca," Marcus said carefully, "what happens now? I mean with us, with this?" He gestured around. The apartment, indicating the developing relationship between them. Rebecca smiled. "I don't know. What do you want to happen?" It was another fair question, and one Marcus wasn't sure he could answer. What he wanted and what he thought was safe for Emma weren't necessarily the same thing. "I want Emma to be happy and secure," he said finally. "Everything else is secondary to that." "And you think letting people into your life threatens that security?" "Doesn't it? Emma's already lost one mother. If she gets attached to you and then something happens..." Rebecca nodded, understanding the fear without needing it fully explained. "There are no guarantees, Marcus. Not in rescue work, not in relationships, not in life. But that doesn't mean we stop trying to connect with people." From the living room came Emma's voice. "Rebecca, Daddy, come look at this." They found Emma pointing excitedly at the television, where a news story was playing about flood recovery efforts in Cedar Falls. The footage showed the construction site, the damaged downtown area, and interviews with residents whose homes had been flooded. "Look, it's Mr. Hendricks," Emma exclaimed. Sure enough, Tom Hendricks was on screen, standing in front of his reopened hardware store. The interviewer was asking him about the recovery process. "The whole community came together," Tom was saying. "People helping people, taking risks for strangers. That's what got us through this. That's what always gets us through." The story continued with footage of volunteers clearing debris and residents helping to repair flood-damaged homes. It was a picture of community cooperation that would have made Marcus uncomfortable a month ago. Now, watching Emma's excitement at seeing their town on television, he felt something different. Pride. "We're part of that," Emma said, looking up at him. "We helped make that happen." Marcus realized she was right. The rescue hadn't been an isolated incident. It had been part of a larger pattern of people choosing to help each other rather than focusing solely on their own problems. His decision to risk everything for the Hendricks family had been one piece of a community-wide response to the crisis. As they drove home later that evening, Emma chattered excitedly about seeing their town on television and about the dinner at Rebecca's. Marcus listened, hearing a happiness in her voice that had been absent for the 3 years since her mother left. "Daddy," Emma said as they pulled into their driveway, "do you like Rebecca?" The question was innocent but loaded with implications. Marcus chose his words carefully. "Yes, I like her. She's a good person." "Why do you ask?" "Because I like her too. And I think she likes us." "What makes you think that?" "She smiles differently when we're there, like she's really happy, not just being nice." Marcus parked the truck and sat for a moment, processing Emma's observation. At 8 years old, she had an intuitive understanding of people that often surprised him. "How would you feel if Rebecca became a bigger part of our lives?" he asked. Carefully, Emma considered this seriously. "Like if she was here more, maybe lived with us. Maybe something like that, eventually." Emma nodded decisively. "I think that would be good. Our house is kind of quiet with just us. And Rebecca knows how to do brave things like you do." As they walked toward the house, Marcus realized that Emma had already moved past the fears that still paralyzed him. She was ready for their family to grow, ready to risk loving someone else despite the possibility of loss. Maybe it was time for him to be as brave in his personal life as he'd been on that stormy night 3 weeks ago. House felt different as they settled in for the evening, not empty or isolated, but expectant. Like a place waiting to be filled with more life, more laughter, more love than two people could provide alone. Marcus tucked Emma into bed and kissed her goodnight, then stood at his bedroom window looking out at the lights of Cedar Falls. Somewhere out there, Rebecca was probably reviewing rescue protocols or planning her next training session. The Hendricks family was safe in their own home, grateful for a second chance they'd never expected to receive. And tomorrow, Marcus would go back to building bridges, not just the concrete and steel structure that would span the Cascade River, but the personal connections that would span the gap between isolation and community, between fear and love, between the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. For 3 years, he'd believed that he didn't need a wife, didn't need anyone except Emma. But that belief had been tested by a raging river and a woman brave enough to risk everything for strangers. Now, looking out at his community and thinking about the woman who'd changed his life, Marcus realized that needing people wasn't a weakness to be avoided. It was a strength to be embraced. The storm had passed, but its lessons would last a lifetime. Morning sun cast long shadows across the completed Morrison Bridge as Marcus walked across its span, checking the final details before the official opening ceremony. The structure was beautiful in its simplicity, clean lines, solid engineering, built to withstand whatever the Cascade River might throw at it for the next century. Emma skipped along beside him, her hair longer now, her face showing the confidence that came with being 9 years old and knowing her place in the world. She wore a new dress, pale blue with small white flowers, chosen specifically for today's celebration. "It's really finished, isn't it, Daddy?" she said, running her hand along the bridge's polished steel railing. "Every bolt, every rivet, every support beam," Marcus confirmed. "This bridge isn't going anywhere." As they reached the center of the span, Marcus paused to look down at the river below. The water ran clear and peaceful, nothing like the raging torrent that had nearly killed him a year ago. It was hard to believe this gentle stream had once been powerful enough to wash away buildings and threaten lives. "There's where the cable was." Emma pointed to a spot downstream where they could see the concrete pier that had served as their anchor point. "And there's where Rebecca caught you when you fell." Marcus smiled at her casual mention of events that had changed all their lives. To Emma, the rescue had become family history, as natural to discuss as any other significant moment in their shared past. The sound of vehicles arriving drew their attention back toward shore. The dedication ceremony was starting early as townspeople began gathering in the park adjacent to the bridge. Marcus could see Rebecca directing the setup of chairs and speaking equipment with her characteristic efficiency. She wore a green dress that brought out her eyes, and her hair was styled in a way that was both professional and elegant. In the year since the rescue, Rebecca had become so integrated into their lives that Marcus sometimes forgot there had ever been a time when she wasn't there. She attended Emma's school events, helped with homework, joined their weekend hiking trips, and somehow managed to make it all seem effortless despite her demanding work schedule. "There she is." Emma waved enthusiastically at Rebecca, who looked up and waved back with a smile that seemed reserved specifically for them. As they walked back toward shore, Marcus reflected on how completely his life had transformed. The man who had once insisted he didn't need anyone now couldn't imagine navigating daily life without Rebecca's partnership. She'd become not just Emma's second parent, but his equal partner in every decision that mattered. The change hadn't happened overnight. There had been difficult conversations about boundaries, about Emma's needs, about how to blend two very different approaches to life. Rebecca's work still took her away for days at a time on rescue missions, and there had been tense nights when Marcus waited by the phone, knowing she was risking her life for strangers. But they'd worked through each challenge together, building something that felt stronger than either of them could have created alone. Mayor Patricia Williams was already testing the microphone as people continued to arrive. Marcus recognized faces throughout the crowd: construction workers from his crew, teachers from Emma's school, business owners from downtown, families who had been affected by the flood. Tom and Sarah Hendricks were there with David, who was home from his first semester at the State University, where he was studying emergency management. "Mr. Dalton." David jogged over, looking more mature in his college attire, but still carrying the earnest enthusiasm that had driven him toward rescue work. "I wanted to thank you again. My professors say I'm one of the most motivated students they've ever had in the program." "That motivation was always there," Marcus replied. "The flood just showed you what you wanted to do with it." Emma hugged David's legs, a greeting that had become traditional whenever he was home from school. Despite the age difference, they'd maintained a special friendship based on their shared experience of that terrible night. "Are you going to speak at the ceremony?" David asked. Marcus shook his head. The mayor's handling of the official remarks. "I'm just here to watch Emma cut the ribbon." That had been Emma's idea, supported enthusiastically by the town council. Since the rescue had become local legend, and since Emma had been such a crucial part of the night's events, everyone agreed she should have the honor of officially opening the bridge her father had built. Rebecca approached, looking radiant despite having spent the morning coordinating logistics. "Everything's ready," she said, slipping her hand into Marcus's with the casual intimacy of long partnership. "Emma, are you excited about your big moment?" "A little nervous," Emma admitted. "What if I mess up the ribbon cutting?" "Impossible," Rebecca assured her. "You just hold the scissors and cut. The rest is just a ceremony." As the crowd gathered, Marcus found himself thinking about the speech he might give if he were addressing them. He would talk about how the bridge represented more than just a way to cross the river. It symbolized the connections that bound communities together, the willingness to help others even at personal cost, the strength that came from interdependence rather than isolation. But he was content to let others do the talking today. His role was to stand with his family and watch as the town celebrated not just a bridge, but the spirit of cooperation that had made it possible. Mayor Williams called for attention and began her remarks about civic pride and community resilience. Marcus listened with half an ear, more focused on Emma's nervous excitement and Rebecca's steady presence beside him. This was what happiness looked like, he realized. Not the absence of problems or risks, but the presence of people who would face those challenges alongside you. "And now," the mayor announced, "I'd like to invite Emma Dalton to officially open the Morrison Bridge." Emma walked forward with careful dignity, accepting the oversized scissors from the mayor. The red ribbon stretched across the bridge's entrance, fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. Marcus held his breath as Emma positioned the scissors, then cut cleanly through the ribbon with one confident motion. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Emma beamed, holding up the ribbon pieces like trophies. Marcus felt tears unexpectedly well up in his eyes, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude for how much his life had changed. As people began walking across the new bridge, Rebecca leaned close to Marcus. "There's something I wanted to tell you," she said quietly. "What's that?" "I got offered a position with the State Emergency Management Office, based here in Cedar Falls, coordinating regional rescue operations." Marcus felt his heart skip. "That's incredible. You'd be home every night?" "Most nights anyway. No more traveling across 3 states for assignments. I'd be training local teams, developing protocols, working with communities to improve their emergency preparedness. And you want to take it?" Rebecca smiled. "I want to take it if you think it's a good idea. This would be a big change. More responsibilities, different challenges, but it would mean really putting down roots here." Marcus looked around at the celebrating crowd. at Emma accepting congratulations from townspeople, at the bridge that would serve this community for generations. Putting down roots suddenly seemed like the most natural thing in the world. "I think it's a perfect idea," he said as the official ceremony concluded and people began to disperse. The Hendricks family approached to say goodbye. Tom shook Marcus's hand with the firm grip of a man who understood the value of good work. "Beautiful bridge, Marcus. Built to last." "That was always the plan." Sarah hugged both Marcus and Rebecca. "We can never thank you enough for what you did that night." "You already have," Rebecca replied. "Seeing your family safe and thriving is all the thanks we need." David knelt down to Emma's level. "Hey, bridge opener, are you proud of your dad?" "Very proud," Emma said seriously. "He builds good bridges." As the Hendricks family walked away, Marcus realized David was right to focus on Emma's pride. Everything he'd built over the past year, his relationship with Rebecca, his deeper connections to the community, his evolving understanding of what it meant to be a good father, had been constructed on the foundation of that one night when he'd chosen to help others despite his fears. The three of them walked across the bridge together as the crowd thinned out. Emma ran ahead, testing the echo of her footsteps against the steel structure. Rebecca walked beside Marcus, her hand in his, both of them watching Emma with the shared attention of parents. "Rebecca," Marcus said as they reached the far side of the bridge, "there's something I want to ask you." She looked at him curiously, perhaps sensing the seriousness in his tone. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "A year ago, I would have said I didn't need anyone in my life except Emma. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things." Rebecca waited, understanding that this was a moment that required patience. "You saved more than the Hendricks family that night. You saved me from a life that was too small, too isolated, too afraid of taking risks. You showed me that needing people isn't weakness, it's what makes us human." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Rebecca's eyes widened, but she didn't speak. "Rebecca Stone, will you marry me? Will you help me build a family that's big enough for all the love we have to give?" For a moment, the only sound was the gentle flow of the Cascade River below them. Then Rebecca smiled, the same confident, determined smile she'd worn when she'd volunteered to cross a cable into a storm. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, absolutely yes." Emma's delighted shriek echoed off the bridge structure as she ran back to them, somehow having sensed the significance of the moment, despite not hearing the actual proposal. She threw her arms around both of them, creating a three-person hug. In the middle of the bridge her father had built. "Are you going to be my real mom now?" Emma asked Rebecca. "I'm going to be whatever kind of mom you want me to be," Rebecca replied. "If that's okay with you," Emma nodded vigorously. "It's very okay with me." As they walked back toward town, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The storm that had seemed like a disaster a year ago had actually been the catalyst for everything good that followed. The flood had washed away his old life of isolation and self-reliance, making room for something infinitely better. The man who had once said, "I don't need a wife," now understood that love wasn't about need, it was about choice. He chose to build a life with Rebecca, not because he couldn't survive without her, but because surviving wasn't enough. He wanted to thrive, to grow, to be part of something larger and more meaningful than just his own small existence. Emma skipped ahead of them, already planning the wedding in her 8-year-old mind, chattering about dresses and flowers and whether she could be the maid of honor. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Marcus found himself looking forward to all the complications and joys that came with blending two lives into one family. The Morrison bridge stretched behind them, solid and permanent, connecting one side of the river to the other, just as the events of that stormy night had connected Marcus to his community, and to the woman who would soon be his wife. Some bridges were built of concrete and steel. Others were built of courage, trust, and the willingness to risk everything for love. Both kinds, Marcus had learned, were essential for getting from where you were to where you needed to be. As they walked toward their future together, the river flowed peacefully beneath the bridge, carrying away the last traces of the storm that had changed everything, leaving behind only the solid foundation of the life they would build together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.